Good afternoon, upper sixth. So here we are, bullet point 3, business growth and objectives. So growth could be market size, market share, could be vinyl sales, could be growth in revenue, could be growth in profit, could be growing into new markets. It could be global niche markets. We've recently completed that unit. It could be lots of things. Business objectives are not just about sales and profits, even though it could be. We're thinking about short, medium, longer term objectives. When we look at the likes of Spotify, who have not made any profit really to speak of other than this year, there's a tiny bit during COVID. So why were they willing to lose so much money for so long? Well, clearly they were focused on the future, and someone at Spotify in the industry saw the rapid growth of streaming to be dominating the industry like it is at the moment, and maybe it'll be dominating even more in the future. Hence the profits that they've made this year and not in previous years. They've lost hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in the pursuit of where they are now and where they'll hopefully be in the future. Just look at the history of Amazon, and you will see for the first possible 15 years of Amazon existing, they didn't make any money, and that's because they were focusing on other objectives. We've talked about Amazon's objectives of going into India, for example. We know it's a BRIC country, emerging market, rise of the middle class, disposable incomes, yada yada. And their targets were new customer acquisitions, repeat purchase, and reliable delivery. They said in their plan that they did not anticipate profitability within the first 5 years. Students, do not think everything is about short-term profits. It is not. And we've already talked about business objectives of those small retail owners that are lifestyle and they're just about managing. Maybe their business objective is survival, so they can be surrounded by records all day. So there's lots of things we could think about here, and I'll drop a bit of Maslow in for good measure when we're talking about that. So we're going to compare Spotify and Apple, plus other stuff, and it's really interesting. So 18% of the mobile phone handset market belongs to Apple, 18 to 20. Now, most of you will have iPhones. Most of you will think that everyone else on the planet has iPhones. They don't. And since the Apple Music is directly linked to iPhone handset ownership, it's hard to believe that Apple will ever catch up. But who knows what's going to happen in the future? We'll see. But I think lots of music companies and recording artists would love us to all buy from Apple Music, because in this extract here, for example, we can see the difference between the two different platforms. Well, let's face it, we can see how much money possibly goes to, obviously, the recording artist. There's a lot here, okay? So think about it. There's lots of profits that will stay with Spotify and with Apple, but it's all carved up in different ways. And that's probably because Spotify generate less revenue, because quite a lot of their revenue is from advertising, because people are using this lovely term freemium. So it's not premium, it's freemium, which means most of the revenue that comes into Spotify is from adverts, and that's why you've got that difference in actual revenue coming in for a million music streams there. Okay, so it's not that Spotify are harsher with recording artists, it's just that they get less revenue per stream because of their business model. Not everyone pays for premium Spotify. Okay, so here's a case study. Again, we're going to do an exam style question at the end of the video, and I'd like you to think about this case study whilst we're going through the research bullet point. So Beggars Group, and they've got a group that own a collection of limited companies. Okay, so we could have a forms of business here. We could have not so much a conglomerate, is it? It's just a parent company. Now we're going to explore rough trade records a little bit in the next slide, and we'll look at how interesting their balance sheet is. But over here on the news that I got from Beggars website, you'll see that on their front page they've got rough trade down the bottom. So they're winning awards, so Brit nominations, Grammy nominations. You know, this sounds like it's at the pinnacle of the industry, and I'm sure they're doing extremely well. But when we look at rough trade records, we'll see actually they're losing money hand over fist. And is this really running a company that's not making profit because it benefits the portfolio of companies and the image of the Beggars Group? Or is it that there is a very generous benefactor that's bailing this company out? Now remember, under UK law, you cannot run a company if you think it's going to constantly lose money. There must be something in their plans that helps them to make money. Now we've already said that Amazon lost money for at least 15 years, but they were focused on other strategic goals. The whole point of this unit is looking at strategic objectives. You've got to think about short, medium and long term, okay, in context with what's important to the company, and surviving whilst they get there. Now we've got global niche in the music industry, and we have got an example of a global niche market here. Remember the unit. If we've got that global niche and it's more or less niche to mass in different markets, overall maybe we still make a profit, we still cover our costs. Okay, so you've got some case study stuff to go through there. We will come back to that. Before we move on, let's look at this 8 marker. 8 markers do not have conclusions. We need 2 possible examples of trade-offs. Clearly we are going to define the trade-off. Now, a common misunderstanding of students is the difference between trade-offs and opportunity costs. They are not similar, they are not the same. And because students get confused, examiners like to ask questions on trade-offs or opportunity costs. And we've got profits and artistic integrity for the Beggars Group. So we're looking for a trade-off and then the however. Actually, we've got our howevers between the two there, and we'd also be looking for something else linked to that as well. There's loads in the case study, and this has been lifted from one of those documents I asked you to download. This is the UK music sector document, and it's been rewritten by our good friend ChatGPT. So moving on. So we're looking at, rough trade, and they've just opened up a new store. And very famous. They're expanding. They've got 7 retail units here, and it looks like it's very popular. Popping onto their website, actually quite a nice website. And we've got vinyls on there. Clearly, vinyl is their bit that they're focusing on, and we've got pictures of their stores in there as well. So they've decided that their new store will focus on vintage-only vinyls. So again, making it a little bit more niche, but we understand PED, we understand that maybe I'm thinking the vintage vinyls are really quite cool, and therefore I'm less sensitive to price increases. Maybe these vintage vinyls are more profitable. Makes sense to do this. Maybe I love rough trade in West London, but I'm going to pop over to East London, and I'm going to, because it's the vintage one. If I've got those around the wrong way, I apologise. Just referring to the pictures down the bottom of the screen. So if we think about their objective could be to grow. It could be economies of scale. You could move stock between branches. We could be selling stuff on the website as well. By having another retail outlet, maybe more footfall going past, more people come in and they may be buying from websites. We've got multi-channel retail here, even though my gut feeling is they're going to be selling more through the stores because you can touch it, you can feel it. Vintage vinyl, I want to know if it's scratched, thank you very much. So all of those sorts of things. And when you're buying that vintage vinyl, you're going to look at the cover, you're going to look at the artwork. Is it limited edition? Is it signed by the artist? How exciting is that? You can't get signed by the artist with a digital download. But this company's already gone bust once. We're not going to write bust in our essays, but into administration, they've already failed once, and they were clearly bailed out. Now, if we look at their accounts from 2020, we know what was happening in 2020 and 21 with our good old pandemic, but it's quite interesting to look at the trend. So we can see that the stock has increased. Well, this makes sense. They've opened a 7th store. They're going to buy stock. They need stock or they can't survive, especially if it's vintage. Be very interested in the trendy world of vinyl, how much this is costing them. I'd love to know what the margins were on a bit of vintage vinyl. And we understand supply and demand. And if there's excess demand for limited supply, then yes, I'm willing to pay more money for it, but so are the people demanding money that are selling it to rough trade. So interesting. We'll see how that works out. We've got debtors and cash, so we can see that that's going to be impacting our current assets, and that's not really changing that much over that 4-year period. And then we can see that the current liabilities are getting worse and worse every year as they are growing. Interestingly, they've got non-current liabilities at all. Which is no long-term debt, okay? But then again, they're probably not owning the property, so I'm thinking that they've got long-term lease agreements, so not really sure why that's like that, but anyway, we're probably that they don't have a huge amount of long-term debt, and that current liability is scary. And clearly that's rolling over from year to year, even though they've classified that as current. So it'll be very interesting why this is still a going concern, probably being bailed out or part of the wider business strategy of the group that we mentioned at the beginning of the video. Okay, so cash reserves there are in the negative, which means they are losing money hand over fist. So looking through, we can have a look at some current ratios, acid test ratios, all worked out for you. And look at that acid test ratio once we take out the stock. It was bad enough before, but yeah, so clearly not that close to 1. So how is this a going concern? Who knows? Luckily, they've got a parent group. Yeah, we've got problems. It's not profitable. And maybe they're just running this as a bit of a lifestyle as part of their portfolio of companies. Maybe having the retail outlets is an important part of the overall strategy. Their music is niche. You'd have got that from the case study, or nicher than obviously, Taylor Swift. And that's part of their brand identity. They're proud of that. Yeah, they're not chasing the big chart successes because they acknowledge they are more niche. Problem is, not chasing the chart successes is hammering their profits. And they're selling most of their stock through retail in London, depending on the part of London, depends how expensive that shop is, by the way. Then we have people in shops, we have staffing costs and all the other things we've spoken about before. Now, maybe they're focused on long-term profits. Maybe this is like Spotify. When everyone was criticising Spotify, you've all done the past paper question on Spotify from a previous past paper, and it looks like their business model is just terrible. They're just borrowing money. They're losing hundreds of millions of dollars. Well, this year, the naysayers are going, well, actually, that's worked out quite well. Yeah, the naysayers used to say that Amazon might not be a viable business in the early days of rapid expansion of Amazon. But Jeff Bezos done all right, hasn't he? So PLCs clearly must be focused on their business objectives, but it doesn't mean it's short-term focus. And it's really important that we acknowledge that we could be in a very long-term strategy. And I'm glad in lots of ways that Spotify has made profits this year, because your case studies were put into exam papers a year ago and Spotify have never made a profit other than a little bit of a blip during COVID. And now you know that they've made profits. Interesting. So some will run businesses in this sector just because they love music. We've bleated on that enough. Now, we're thinking about growth, but don't just think about popular music. John Williams is everywhere. I remember going to a John Williams concert a few years ago and absolutely love the music, from Star Wars to Harry Potter to loads of other things that I didn't even know that he'd written music for movies. And this is not a new thing. You know, we've got David Bowie up there, bless him, Paul McCartney and some others as well. And this chap here that I'd never heard of, I apologise, he's been writing music for Final Fantasy games and probably the movies that came out since the 1980s. The gaming industry and the movie industry, more the gaming industry actually, is so big. There's more money spent on game development than there is on movies. So actually don't underestimate the importance of this. We might see this as a growing sector because of how demanding the gaming industry is. You know, if I'm paying 70 quid for a game plus all the add-ons, I'm expecting that movie experience, which is why we see so many movie stars in video games nowadays. Okay, so we're thinking that it's really hard to get growth in what we would class the traditional music market, but if you make it, you do well. A couple of years ago, we had a Hollywood director come into school and talking about, obviously, you know, the movie industry, and he's also a producer and he's done Broadway shows and stuff like that. And one of our students turned around to him and said, with the average earnings of an actor in Hollywood at $18,000 a year, why should we focus on going into that sector? And our visitor was very polite and said, however, some people make it, and Robert De Niro makes at least $10 million a year. Okay, it's probably more than that. I've misremembered the figures. But actually, that's the draw for this industry. If you make it and you become the Paul McCartneys of this world, the Ariana Grandes, then you make it. So there are lots of people that are there, which means lots of people are trying to break into the industry. Maybe they do that through the niche route, hoping to become more mass in the future. In the future, temporal arguments. Okay, across the industry, yes, we understand that profits may not be the main goal. Maybe people just want to be brilliant artists. They love jamming with their mates. And when they become successful, it comes with money. I don't meet many recording artists. I don't think many of them are only doing it for the money, but they enjoy the money when it comes. Okay, so we're thinking about sources of finance to help our companies get off the ground or to develop. Now, if we're talking about some of these niche brands, it might be that I'm in a band and I need some money for a professional recording studio because I'm not lucky enough to go to a school that already has one. And I'm going out to possible fan bases. Now, here's an example. Through crowdfunding, this was a section on Sampha. There's other crowdfunding platforms out there, and the Layers are a band. They've released a couple of albums before. They were, you know, they just wanted to get a couple of grand together because they want a more professional album for their fans. In return, then if you give some money to them, then once they record their third studio album, they'll give you a copy. They'll say thank you. And maybe you're supporting them just because you love the style and the sound of the Layers album. And I'm sure that they are brilliant. However, as we can see twice, they raised £1,781. They were hoping for £2.5 grand. So not astronomical really. And they got 68 backers. Now, if you do a bit of mental maths there, that's less than 30 quid per backer. I bet there's some people that spend 30 quid a month on lottery tickets. So in some ways, this is a donation. In some ways, they like the idea. Maybe they've watched them playing their favourite song, whatever that is, in a local pub or a small venue or something. And they just thought, you know what, I'm going to give them 30 quid. And some people would have given more and less. But, you know, they might get a recording back. If you're lucky, you might get a vinyl. I doubt it. But it's more of a punt, and you don't really expect to get your money back on this type of investment. Even though there are some examples of crowdfunding that we've studied in class. Brewdog's a great one. They don't make very good music, but maybe they help fund, well, indirectly fund karaoke. But we need to remember Maslow's hierarchy of need. Remember the poster that's on the wall in the classroom. And maybe it's that belonging. It's that love and belonging in the middle of the hierarchy there. That I just want to support the Layers. They're my favourite band. They're really nice. Yeah, I bought them a pint once. Maybe that's why I'm doing it. Just part of that love and belonging. Maybe if we see their third studio album be more successful, the esteem comes from, even though I've only given them 30 quid, I was part of the bigger picture. I helped them a little bit get into a good studio. I don't think I'm going to get self-actualization from giving them 30 quid. Remember, we're not going to talk about self-actualization. We pursue towards self-actualization according to Maslow. But if you achieve it, it's going to be very short-lived, isn't it? Because we're human beings and we're not happy for long. Miserable race that we are sometimes. So thinking about crowdfunding on a bigger scale, American Psycho, the musical, so we can link it into the research theme, 150 grand for this one. They went out, they had fans that loved the short-lived success in the US. They wanted to come to the UK and they needed some money to get them into a small theatre. The longer-term aims of this were sort of mirroring the business model that they saw in the United States. Start off with a small theatre, get some people in, get some good reputation, and then hopefully move on to Broadway. Well, they ran out of money before getting anywhere near Broadway. I've no idea why they thought it was going to work in the UK. So they went to a small theatre, raised 150 grand, and hopefully it would do well and they would then go to the West End. Didn't quite work out like that. Not been to the Encore Theatre, but it is tiny by all accounts. So limited revenues. Yes, they got some good reviews, which was great. Unfortunately, it failed in the States and didn't do too well here either. Weren't able to transfer to the West End and then didn't get your money back. So 150 grand. I don't know how many investors that was, by the way. I'm hoping there was 150,000 of them and then nobody cares about losing a pound, and maybe they just got a discounted ticket to go to the theatre as a thank you for investing money. It might be that they all gave them 50 quid each and that saved them 50 quid on a theatre ticket. Low risk, absolutely fine. If someone's put 100 grand into this though, with the hopes of getting their money back, then they're going to be a bit disappointed. So if we're thinking about business objectives in our distribution networks, we've already talked about Spotify. And look at that, peppered with loss. And now, according to the wonderful world of the internet, they are in their profit for the first time in 2024. We'll see what it looks like in their final accounts if they write any of that off, but that's what the internet says, so I'm hoping it's true. If it's not, I apologise. According to their accounts, they made a little bit of profit in the COVID years, but overall it looks like it was a bit of a loss. But we can see things were getting better up here if $92 million is better as a loss. But look down here, here we are. And we can see the rapid growth in streaming only. We know that they have that freemium business model for people that don't want to pay for the premium without adverts model. So they are generating revenue from every single song. We know that their revenue per song is less than Apple. which is why the royalties are higher for Apple songs. But compared to Apple, well, this is Apple as a company and not so much Apple Music streaming. This is a monster, and we can think of Apple Music as just part of their brand portfolio, and maybe Apple Music adds value to their mobile phones and laptops. I tried to look for individual profit figures for Apple Music, but it's combined with their cloud computing and their Apple Shop and stuff like that, so I couldn't dig into it. And I couldn't be bothered to read their accounts to see if it actually mentioned it in there. But if we look on Apple Music as just part of a brand portfolio for Apple, Spotify, one trick pony. But it seems like it's starting to pay off. Okay, so here's something according to a bit of AI. You can see by the format of this is lifted straight out of Google. We can see that Spotify has that larger music library. Apple Music is integrated into their product portfolio. Spotify users tend to be a bit younger, and the Apple ones of a more diverse age range, normally because of the Apple products that they've bought. But if they've only got not only by the way, but if they've only got an 18% handset market share around the globe, and their product success for music is directly linked to their handset subscriptions, maybe they're never going to catch up with Spotify, who currently, according to this, have a 30% global streaming market share. That's a lot. 240 million subscribers, yeah, compared to 93. Yeah. Now, if that continues to grow and the difference continues to grow, then we'll see what happens. If it continues to grow, that puts a lot of power with Spotify. Nice bit of Porters here. The power of the supplier, probably the buyer really, when we're talking, depending who you're talking about here. But where's the incentive for Spotify to give music artists more money? Maybe Apple pay more money, but let's face it, their market share isn't going to get that mass appeal that the recording artists want. We'll see if the profit is sustainable and how much pressure the music industry put on Spotify. Let's face it, Spotify will not be successful without recording artists, but recording artists might not be successful without Spotify. So here's some figures for you. Again, we can see the revenue increases here, and this is taken from a slightly different source. So we've got marginal profits there in 2021. Just have a look at the data extract and that you're given in the exam and play with it. Remember, however, in the future, I've given you the power, well, the internet has, of seeing into the future. Your data extracts will be up to 2023, maybe touching on 24, maybe there's a forecast percentage or figure dropped into a case study for you to question the reliability of the data. I hope so. We love those questions. But you now know that Spotify are making profits. So we've got the difference in streaming and profitability, and my point really is before streaming, there was so much piracy going on that the music industry was in free fall with those revenue figures we saw in the first video. And now that they're making profit, will they start paying more money to the artists to be fairer? Doubt it. Anyway, so when we're thinking about Spotify as well, quite a lot of their success is down to rapport with their customers. So because they've got this massive global back catalogue and current catalogue of music, they will have different marketing strategies in different nations. Now we know that this is not in the A-level spec, but it's worthwhile considering how companies like Spotify might target their marketing on regions, so regiocentric marketing strategies. So think about that. But if you get a question comparing ethnocentric and geocentric, like we did in the previous video, you're not going to mention regiocentric, are you? Because that's just showing off. and maybe you get lost and don't answer the question. So keep focused, but it's worthwhile understanding that companies will. And it's economies of scale as well. Instead of targeting every single country, if we can target a region, then actually that's probably better for our bottom line and brand image as well. So we've got lots of interesting stuff in there that you can read. And, you know, I'm not a big fan or ever tried actually of K-pop, but some of the Latin music's great. And I'm not really into Afrobeats or West African music, but these genres are growing in popularity, as it says here, according to the source from Euronews. So actually they become more important, they're growing with popularity. Look out for those words. It might be that we have a very, I don't know, ethnocentric, geocentric marketing strategy, but if West African music becomes more popular, then maybe they'll do a collab with Shakira and bring it into the mainstream and make it a bit more geocentric. We'll see. Anyway, Spotify involves connection with local communities. Well, if that's not leaning more towards a polycentric marketing strategy, I don't know what is. And then we can see that we've got the mature markets, nice bit of Boston matrix product life cycle there. Maybe the cash cow markets are being looked after, and maybe we're seeing more growth in this freemium model, which is helping them with ad revenue. If they get millions and millions and millions of consumers on the freemium model, they will start ramping up their costs and prices, of their advertising. Now, I'm not paying for Spotify, it's not going to impact me, but maybe people will start paying more for their advertising. This is the only way that Facebook ever made money, was when they went mobile first, and their M marketing, so mobile marketing, became more important. Okay, YouTube make money not because people watch stuff on laptops as much, but because loads of people will watch it on their mobile phones with the adverts as well. Okay, so growth objectives. Go very careful, A-level students, presuming that everyone wants to take over the world. And in the middle of all these lovely icons, we have got the wonderful Amazon. Remember, they didn't make any money for 15 years. They were focused on the long-term growth objectives. So if you've got a hook in a question, which is economic growth or profitability, remember that is temporal. That is time-based. It might be that I sacrifice profit now for more profit in the future. The chief examiner mentions in the examiner reports that he likes, and one of them's a lady, by the way, he likes temporal-based conclusions, however, in the future, those sorts of things, considering how things might change. And that's why a couple of years ago they introduced the MOPS acronym, which is, you don't need to do MOPS in your conclusions, but it helps. It helps you to think about how this might be impacted in the future. If you just look at Spotify's business model and financial performance since they started, really up until now, you would think that it is going to run out of cash and people are going to lose faith in it. Well, clearly not. Okay, so we have got problems in the industry. HMV, retail-based model with a bit of website. We shall see if it continues with its growth. In face of the lower footfall on the high street. You've got Woolworths up there that none of you will remember, except for your parents telling you about Pick and Mix. And I've mentioned the Virgin Megastore. Well, clearly you don't remember it because you're all too young. But these were mega brands. Woolworths was around for over 100 years. And obviously Virgin Megastore was probably the brainchild of one of our old students. And it was very good for many years until it wasn't, and then Richard being Richard, they closed it, and quite rightly so. So back to our 8 marker, and it should say 8 up there, but it says 10. I do apologize, I'm not going to re-record this part of it. It's an 8 marker. So assess 2 examples of trade-offs between profit and artistic integrity for the Beggars Group. So we're looking at a reasonable definition for trade-off. And so trade-off in a business refers to the situation where a company must compromise one objective in order to achieve another. So it's a bit of both. Okay, and I've given some examples there as part of my definition just to make sure I was sort of in context. Now, opportunity cost is one or the other, so giving up that second best opportunity. Trade-off is a bit of both. And if I focus on artist integrity and my brand image of being niche, well, maybe that's it at the price of profitability. Okay, but I'm not giving up profit altogether because I need to pay the bills. Okay, so it's very much a trade-off question. So moving it, so one trade-off, and I like to start off these types of things with the 8 markers, is normally 2 disadvantages or 2 limitations or 2 advantages. And here we've got 2 possible examples of. So one trade-off, yeah, so at least we know we're answering the question. I've left a space between the paragraph to make it easy for you and the examiner to read. Of Beggars Group prioritises curated music, output and strong artistic relationships. Nice quotation marks, so I remember to put the evidence in there. It also makes it easy for the examiner to read. Ensuring artists have creative freedom rather than pressuring them to produce commercial hits. This builds loyalty among musicians and fans, creating a strong brand identity and long-term credibility in the industry. Okay, this sets up my counter argument, which is the second part of the trade-off. However, by avoiding mass market releases, Beggars Group misses out on potential chart-topping revenue that major labels even enjoy, making it harder to compete financially. Financially is linked to profits. You could have made that a little bit better by saying, therefore, negatively impacting their profitability overall, but financially is close enough to profits. Another trade-off. You'll notice we've got signposting language here. Another trade-off is, okay, hi, Mr. Mrs. Examiner, here's my second argument, and I've left a space between each of them to make it blindingly obvious that I'm talking about 2 possibilities, because if I only talk about 1 possibility, don't expect more than 4 marks. Remember, this is not a 10 marker, this is an 8 marker. I apologise for the typo. So another trade-off is, rather than relying solely on streaming, Beggars Group ensures financial stability through catalogue revenue, vinyl sales, and a diversified approach to distribution. We've seen that by their website. This strategy reduces dependency on low per stream payout. Nice link into the data extract at the beginning of the presentation. And creates alternative revenue streams that align with the brand's independent ethos. Part of the artistic integrity is that they have all these vinyl sales and it's diverse and it's a bit global niche. However, by not prioritising streaming-friendly releases, Beggars Group risks low digital revenue, which dominates the modern music industry. Now, that last bit I'm not very happy with because it ends with revenue. The question is not about revenue, it's about profit. So by identifying the hooks, the trade-off between profits and artistic integrity, well, we've got artistic integrity in the first part of that second trade-off, but we have not linked it into profitability. So that answer doesn't get full marks. To make it even better, just add a little bit more on the end of that chain of argument, and we are going to get to profits, aren't we? Therefore, negatively impacting their overall profitability. Okay, we've got lower digital revenue, which is context. A big error that some students make on 8 markers is their paragraphs, their main body text, this stuff, they contextualise well. And then the howevers are abstract rubbish. If it's abstract, however, you're not going to get the marks for it. So make sure you contextualise throughout. Remember to change the 8 marker on this one. So looking at the marking grid, we've only got 3 levels on 8 markers, as you'll all know. But again, we get the word throughout by relevant effective use of business behaviour in context. Well contextualized is in there again. You see, it's so important they say it twice. We need balance, which means we need possible examples. We need balance for each of those. And if you don't contextualize your howevers, don't expect to be towards the top of level 3. Okay. Ideally, you'd get full marks on this because if you get full marks on both your 8 markers, that's 16% of the paper. If you, 100 marks, if you then get level 4 on all of your essays, you're into A-star territory. The problem with 8 markers and 10 markers is they're easy, or easier than the 12s and 20s. So students fall into the time trap. They write way too much. It's 1.2 minute per mark, and therefore you should be spending roughly 10 minutes on this, and that includes getting the information out of the case study. If it was me, I would be writing a definition first, yeah, even if there's not got any examples in there. Then I know it's a compromise of one objective in order to achieve another, and that compromise, I'm then looking for 2 different trade-offs in the case study. Okay, in this case, linked to profit and artistic integrity. So it helps me to read the case study quickly, come back and write the answer. Okay, this would be the first case study in the half of the paper you're answering. So you'll remember that case study when you go on to the 10 marker to make hopefully a 10 marker nice and quick within 12 minutes. Hopefully that was useful. Lots of hopefullys there. I'm going for a sandwich. Have a nice afternoon.